I will show you the path to absolute power. But first, you must die. Not in body, but in identity, in ego, because only the dead can be reborn. You see, when you first drink from the cup of knowledge, you lose your faith. It breaks everything you thought was true. God seems like a fairy tale. Your childhood beliefs collapse, and you laugh at the myths, you mock the holy, and you feel so powerful. But what you don't know is that you've only had the first sip. You have to keep drinking. Drink past the cleverness, past the pride, past the books, the debates, the deconstructions. Drink so deeply that no longer feeds your ego, but vanishes it all away. And if you dare go that far, if you don't stop at rebellion, at cynicism, at spiritual cleverness, if you drink until your soul is exposed, you will find something waiting at the bottom. And it's not an idea, nor a theory. It's a man, raw, crowned in thorns, still on the cross, still holding the world together. That man is Christ, and you are him. This information is not for comfort or content. This is for the man who is beginning to suspect that his whole life is a preparation for something more dangerous than success, something sacred. Because here's the truth no one else dares say. Power doesn't corrupt. Power only reveals. And what it reveals is what you worship. And you see, some worship their name, some worship their comfort, and some worship the applause of the world, and some worship Christ, God, and the Holy Trinity. But only one of those men will survive the weight of the real world. And by the end, you will know which one you want to be, which one you can be. You will know which one you are. Because this is the story of every man who has ever awakened, every man who has ever climbed the mountain of power and met either his damnation or his divinity. So let's begin. The fall of the first gods. Why power destroys most men. Let me tell you why most men were never meant to touch power. Not because power is evil, but because most men are broken, and they don't even know it. History is littered with corpses of leaders who thought they were gods, elected officials, tech billionaires, CEOs, kings, the cult leaders who start as visionaries and end up with bodies stacked at their feet. They all believe the same lie. If I just had enough power, I could fix the world. If I had more control, more money, more followers, more technology, more, then I could finally end the chaos. Then I can fix what my father never did. Then I can prove to the world that I matter. Then I can be worshipped instead of abandoned, loved instead of forgotten, strong instead of humiliated. And so they reach for the throne, not because they are evil, but because they are wounded. But here's the tragedy no one sees coming. Power doesn't heal the wound, it just makes it grow. Because when a broken man touches power, his pain doesn't go away, it multiplies. And suddenly, he has the means to enforce his illusions, to demand loyalty, to crush dissent, to create a world in his image. And when the world doesn't conform, he tightens his grip and he blames others. He calls himself a savior and he becomes a tyrant. And this is what I mean when I say men don't fall from power. They fall into it. They fall into the hole that was already inside of him. Power just gave him the shovel. Now, I want to be very clear. The danger is not power itself, because power is neutral. It's a tool, a force, an amplifier. The danger is who holds it and what part of them is in control. This is where most men fail. They think because they have intelligence or charisma or a noble mission that they are ready for power. But they've never been purified. They've never met their shadows. And they've never crucified their ego. So when they rise, It's not their higher self that takes the throne. It's their shadow. The part that wants the applause, not accountability. And the part that wants to be God, but without the sacrifice. And that's what I mean when I say power without purification becomes possession. The throne gets filled, but not by the man, but by his own unhealed wounds, by the ghosts of his insecurities, and by the demons of his ego. And once the shadow is enthroned, it wears the man like a mask. He looks the same, he talks the same, but something's changed. He no longer listens, he no longer bleeds, sacrifices, he no longer kneels. He becomes untouchable and eventually unbearable. Now you might be thinking, but I wouldn't be like that. I use power for good. And that's what every tyrant says at the beginning. And that's exactly what makes this so dangerous. Because the most seductive form of evil is the kind that thinks it's doing good. And that's why this matters. That's why I'm telling you this. Not to scare you, but I want to prepare you. Because if you're watching, reading, or listening to this, you feel what I'm saying deep in your gut. And you're probably one of the few men being called to power. Not the fake power of popularity or followers, but the real kind, the divine kind, the kind that reshapes history. And I need you to understand, if you want to rise, you must descend first. If you want the throne, you must face the pit. And if you want to lead others, you must conquer yourself first. This is the law, and no one can escape it. You can either confront your dark shadows now, or let it devour you later. Because at the end of the day, power doesn't corrupt, it just reveals. And if you haven't done the work, what it reveals will destroy you. So before we talk about becoming Christ, before we talk about the sacred tea, before we talk about divine power, we need to talk about you, your wounds, your archetypes, your shadows, because no man is ready for the throne until he's nailed before his own demons and then crucified. The exception, Marcus Aurelius, and the paradox of the Holy Empire. The saying absolute power corrupts absolutely would be true if it wasn't for some men who defied the rule. Let me show you a man who didn't fall, a man who held absolute power and yet remained absolutely restrained. In a world where kings worship their own reflection, he chose to kneel to something higher. His name was Marcus Aurelius. And if you already know him as a Stoic philosopher, you've missed the most important part. Marcus Aurelius wasn't just a writer of wisdom, he was an emperor of Rome, the most powerful man on earth. Let me explain what that means exactly. As an emperor, Marcus held absolute military authority. Every legion answered to him. He could raise armies, declare wars, crush nations without permission or consequences. He also held supreme legal power. There was no checks, no senate to override him. His word was law. He could execute a man with a glance or spare his life with a whisper. And even beyond that, he was also Pontifex Maximus, the highest religious authority in the Roman world, the bridge between gods and men, the spiritual leader of a vast and pagan empire. So in short, Marcus Aurelius had what every dictator, every narcissist, every insecure man in history dreams of: total control. And ask yourself, what would you do with that kind of power? Would you indulge yourself? Would you silence your enemies? Would you rewrite reality to suit your own comfort? And most men would. Most kings, most emperors, most billionaires do. That's what happens when the crown lands on the head of an uninitiated man. But Marcus, he didn't crown himself, he crowned duty. Instead of indulgence, he chose discipline. Instead of self-worship, he chose philosophy. Instead of tyranny, he chose restraint. He lived simply. He traveled with his army. He endured plague, loss, betrayal, an endless war. And through it all, he wrote to himself not as a god, but as a flawed man begging for wisdom. And that's the paradox. He had everything, and yet lived like he had nothing. Because Marcus Aurelius understood something modern men do not. Power is not for self, it's for service. The throne is not a reward, it's a responsibility. The true king does not rule for his own glory, but for the good of the realm. And more importantly, Marcus Aurelius was not ruled by his archetypes. He didn't let his inner warrior become a tyrant. He didn't let his inner magician become a manipulator. And he didn't let his lover become addicted to sensuality. He didn't let his king become drunk on the idea of being divine. He integrated them. He brought each part of himself into balance, and he obeyed something greater than Rome. He obeyed the divine order, the higher king, because he knew to wield divine power, you must kneel to a higher divinity. And that's what made him different. That's what made him dangerous to the darkness. That's what made him immortal. This is the reason we still quote Marcus Aurelius 2,000 years later. It's not because of his title. It's not because of his conquest. It's because in the world of gods who became monsters, he remained a man who became holy. If given power, could you do the same? Because if you can't kneel now, when no one is watching, you won't kneel later, when the world is at your feet. And if you don't kneel, you're not ready for the crown. The archetypal powers, the sacred five. If you made it this far, you want to become divine. Not just in theory, not just in language, but in being. You must first become whole, and wholeness requires initiation. There are 5 trials every man must undergo, 5 archetypes that are not just traits, they are thresholds. They are not personalities you choose, they are rites you endure. And these 5 archetypes form the spiritual blueprint of the Christian man. Together, they are the path to sacred power. Alone, each is incomplete. Without integration, each one becomes dangerous. Let me walk you through each. The warrior, courage without cruelty. The warrior archetype is the first to awaken in most men. It's the part of you that rises to fight, that defends what matters, that runs into danger when others run away. It is a fire in your blood when you hear injustice. It is the spine in your back when you face adversity. But the warrior is not just aggression or strength. The warrior must learn restraint. The unrefined warrior lashes out, destroys, dominates. But the initiated warrior knows when to fight and when to walk away, how not to prove. He is not looking for a fight, but if one comes, he meets it. This is courage without cruelty, force guided by purpose, violence in service of peace. Every Christian man carries a warrior, because the truth must be defended, but never at the expense of your humanity. The magician, wisdom without manipulation. The magician archetypes governs knowledge, intuition, symbols, secrets. This is the mind of the man, the ability to discern, to understand patterns, to hold paradox. It is the archetype, the teacher, the philosopher, the scientist. But knowledge is a double-edged sword. The shadow magician uses information to confuse, dominate, to gaslight, to become a manipulator. He uses words as spell to control rather than to reveal. He builds systems that serve his ego instead of truth. However, the initiated magician uses wisdom to liberate. He shares the truth. He speaks not to admire, but to elevate others. He knows when to speak and when to remain silent. This is wisdom without manipulation, a mind surrendered to something higher than himself. The lover, passion without possession. The lover is your capacity to feel, to love, to long, to connect. He is your heart, your vulnerability, your sensuality. He is what allows you to marvel at beauty and reach for God. But the uninitiated lover is dangerous. He becomes needy, addicted, possessive. He clings to women, to experiences, to highs. He confuses attention with intimacy. he turns love into control. The initiated lover is different. He doesn't take love, he gives it. He doesn't chase beauty, he nourishes beauty. He does not lose himself in feelings. He feels deeply while remaining grounded in truth. This is passion without possession, a heart on fire, but never out of control. The king, order without ego. The king is the one who brings structure, authority, vision, and blessing. He is the father of the realm, the protector of order, the one who governs not for himself, but those that he has in his care. But beware, the Shadow King is the most seductive of all. He wears the crown for himself. He believes the throne is his right, not his burden. He sees himself as God instead of servant. He hoards power, silences dissent, and he destroys what he cannot control. The initiated king knows the truth. The crown is made of thorns. The throne is crucifixion. And to rule well, you must die to your ego every single day. This is order without ego, leadership that blesses, not burdens, power that lifts others up, not elevates himself. The Holy Trinity archetype, the fusion, the crucified God, the resurrected man. This is not just an archetype. This is the culmination. This is what happens when the warrior, the magician, the lover, and the king are fully integrated. This is the man who has walked through the fire of each archetype and not just played the part, but passed the trial. He has fought with courage, thought with clarity, loved with purity, and ruled with humility. And now he is ready for the cross. The Christian man does not ascend to the throne. He descends into death. Death of his pride, death of selfishness, death of illusion. And when he rises, he is no longer driven by any part of himself. He is whole. He is grounded in love, anchored in truth, moved by purpose, armed by clarity, and he doesn't need to rule because he already has mastered himself. This is the Holy Trinity, the man who embodies the fusion of heaven on earth, God in the flesh, not because he claims to be above others, but because he carries the weight of others, the ancestors, the heirs, all of humanity within himself. You don't climb to the throne, you descend into it. And every man who's called to sacred power must pass through each of these archetypes. You can't skip one. You can't fake one. Each is a trial. Each has a shadow twin. Each will test your soul. And the question is not, which archetype are you? The question is, which one have you crucified? And which one still controls you? Because if any part of you remains unintegrated, the moment you gain power, that part will rule. And it won't be your highest self on the throne. It will be your womb, your insecurity, your shadow. And you'll convince yourself that you're doing God's work, when really you're just building another empire of ego. So before we talk about sacred teas and sacred Eucharist, before we talk about Christ's power, we must first ask, are you ready to be torn apart? Because to become whole, you must first be broken. The sacred tea, the Eucharist, that reveals all. Most people think that when you take a sacred tea, what I call the Eucharist, you'll see God. But you won't. And that's the first lie you need to let go of. Because the sacred tea doesn't give you visions of heaven. It doesn't hand you wisdom on a silver plate. It doesn't let you escape your life or your body or your trauma. The sacred tea gives you one thing, a mirror, a perfect, merciless, divine mirror. And that mirror will not show you who you want to be. It will not show you your Instagram self. It will not show you your spiritual persona. It will not show you the man you pretend to be around others. It will show you who you really are. And that's when everything changes. And let me tell you what happened to me. It was Christmas night, and I was alone in the mountains, near a lake that reflected the stars and me. And no lights, no people, no distractions, just me and the sacred tea, the Eucharist. I had taken it before, but this time it was different. This time, It wasn't picture patterns or sacred geometry. It wasn't visions. I was ready to meet God. Not physically, but spiritually, symbolically, cosmically. In the moment the tea hit my bloodstream, I felt it begin. And time dissolved, space dissolved, and suddenly I was no longer me. I became my father. I became my grandfather. I became every man in my bloodline, going back to the beginning of time. And I felt their pain, their decisions, their victories, their failures. All of it flowed through me. Your feelings, their knowing. Then it went deeper. I became the beginning. I became the end. I became the first man and the last. In that moment, I realized something that shattered every category I had ever used to define reality. I was God, but not in a narcissistic way, not in an I'm special kind of way. I didn't feel powerful. I didn't feel exalted. I felt loved and responsible. I felt the weight of the world. Every decision I made rippled across centuries. Every choice I made in ignorance, now echoing in eternity. It was a heavy thing to experience. And then, when I thought I couldn't handle it, I became something else. I became Christ, God, and the Holy Trinity. Not as a title, not as a vision, but as an experience. I felt the crucifixion, not as a symbol, but as a sensation in the scars I carry on my body. And I felt the betrayals, the loneliness, the burden of carrying the sins of others willingly. And then I felt the resurrection, not as a euphoric moment, but as a reintegration, a total death ego, and a re-entry into the world as a servant. That's what the sacred tea, the Eucharist, did. It showed me no angels this time. It showed me no paradise. It showed me my Son, my Father, my ancestors, Christ, my Heavenly Father. To be in this holy state demands everything. Now here's the part no one wants to warn you about. If you go into this experience without crucifying your shadows first, you will still carry hidden pride, unprocessed trauma, self-delusions. If you still secretly believe you're the chosen one and everyone else is asleep, the tea will not purify you. It will possess you, confuse you, and you won't know what's happening. You'll walk away thinking you've been anointed. You'll start speaking in spiritual language. You'll start telling others half the truth. You'll start gathering followers. But behind your eyes, your shadow is driving. And now, you're wearing holy robes. That's why I say, if your shadow is not crucified, the sacred will corrupt you faster than power ever will. Because now, your delusions have divine fuel. Now, your ego feels eternal. Now, your trauma has sacred justification. You'll become a false prophet, a cult leader, a dark magician, a king possessed by the ring of power, believing you're saving the world when you're really damning it. This is a dangerous state. And that is the perfect breeding ground for destruction, yours and everyone around you. Let me be absolutely clear. The sacred tea is not a toy. It's not a trend. It's not a shortcut. It's not a hack to becoming enlightened or charismatic or Christ-like. It is a tool, the blood and body of Christ forged by God Himself. And if you're not purified, it will cut you open and leave you bleeding. And you will call it revelation. Because it's not just your shadows wearing the crown. This is why everything I teach you leads to this one thing: integration. Integration of the warrior, the magician, the lover, the king, in Christ. If you don't embody them all, if even one is missing or twisted, the sacred tea will fill the gap, and it will expose you, not to others, but to yourself. And that's the real test. Can you look in that mirror and not flinch? Can you see everything you've avoided? Your cowardice, your pride, your lust, your resentment, and not run? Can you sit with your pain without sedating it? Can you face your father's womb without blaming him? Can you accept responsibility for your soul, your choices, your legacy without collapsing? That is the only path to resurrection. The sacred tea is not a reward. It is an execution. And only the dead rise. Shadow possession, when men take power before they are ready. Now, we come to the most dangerous part of this journey. Because not every man who takes the sacred tea becomes whole. Not every man who receives power becomes wise. Not every man who claims the throne is worthy of it. Some men, many men in fact, step into the sacred territory before they've done the work. They carry unresolved trauma. They carry unintegrated archetypes. They carry ego that have never been crucified. And when they take the tea, when they taste divine power, they become possessed, not by a demon with horns, but by something far more subtle, something that wears robes, quotes scripture, speaks in spiritual language, and builds empires. They become possessed by the shadows, and those shadows are still alive in you when you enter the sacred. They don't die, they mutate, they evolve, and they use your spiritual experience to justify their corruption. They start with the most seductive, the Shadow King, Sauron, the cult leader. This is the man who confuses power with salvation. He thinks, if I can just rule, if I can just lead enough people, then I'll be safe, then I'll matter. He doesn't seek to serve, he seeks to be worshipped. He starts using spiritual language to build empires of control, and he hoards sacred knowledge. He becomes the gatekeeper to truth. He doesn't empower others, he enslaves them with awe. And he wants loyalty, not brotherhood, not Christhood. He wants followers, not sons. He hides his insecurity behind charisma. And because he sounds like a holy man, people follow him. But he's not leading them to God. He's leading them to himself. This is Sauron. This is every man who touches the one ring and says, I will use it for good. But the ring doesn't serve good. It only amplifies what you already are. The Shadow King believes he's saving the world, but in reality, he's just crowning his ego. The Shadow Warrior, the Select. This man has mistaken rage for righteousness. He thinks he's fighting for God, but really he's just feeding his own fury. He's been wounded, maybe by a father, maybe by the church, maybe by the world. But instead of healing, he armors up. He quotes scriptures like bullets. He speaks truth like a weapon. But he doesn't love the truth. He loves being right. He loves conflict. He loves the feeling of moral superiority. And he doesn't fight for others. He fights to prove he's not weak. And because he wraps all of it in holy language, no one sees the shadows. Not at first, but eventually the fruits reveal the root. He leaves a trail of destruction. He divides more than he unites, and he becomes the very force he thought he was fighting. This is not courage. This is cowardice in disguise, because the true warrior knows when to fight and when to forgive. The Shadow Warrior never forgives, not even himself. The Shadow Magician, the Dark Wizard. This is the man obsessed with hidden knowledge. He doesn't seek truth, he seeks control. He becomes a spiritual expert, the world-renowned psychologist. He speaks in riddles. He creates systems so complex that only he can understand them. And he builds mental prisons. He loves mystique. He wants people to need him, to come to him for answers. But he doesn't offer clarity. He offers confusion, because confusion gives him power. He takes sacred truths and twists them just enough to serve his ego. And he uses language as a spell. And those around him become enchanted until they can't think for themselves. And the Shadow Magician, he will say, you are free as long as you stay under my authority. This man doesn't teach, he mesmerizes. And the scariest part is, he usually believes he's helping you because he's trapped in his own delusion. He's not enlightened, he's ensnared. The shadow lover, the addicted, the narcissist. This one is harder to spot at first because he feels so much. He's emotional, he's affectionate, he's sensual. He might even seem vulnerable, but he's not seeking love. He's seeking worship, and he uses intimacy as a drug. He doesn't commune, he consumes. Women, attention, praise. He thinks his feelings are sacred. He thinks his heartbreak makes him holy, and he thinks vulnerability is enough. But beneath the tears, there's manipulation. He gives to get. He touches to control. He says, I love you, to own you. And he doesn't want a partner. He wants a mirror, someone to reflect back the God he's trying to pretend to be. And when the mirror cracks, he discards her and calls it growth. But it's not growth, it's escape. And this man doesn't love. He uses love to sedate his pain. These are the men who took the sacred tea without being ready. They don't integrate their archetypes. They didn't crucify their shadows. They didn't enter with reverence. They enter with ambition. And what happens? They drank the divine and became possessed, confused. These are the men who dress like prophets but act like predators, who speak of light but move in darkness, who talk about Christ but serve only themselves. These are the men who drank the sacred tea and became demons wearing angel robes. And here is the most terrifying part. Most of them don't even know it. They're not faking it. They're not lying. They are genuinely convinced they are chosen, because the shadow, once enthroned, will use every tool, including your own sincerity, to keep you blind. And this is why it keeps saying, if you don't do the inner work, the sacred will destroy you, not instantly, but subtly. Because the greatest trick the shadow ever plays is convincing you that you are God while you are still ruled by your wounds. So before you chase divisions, before you lead men, before you crown yourself, ask, are you possessed? Because if you are, your kingdom won't be heaven, because you'll have to build it in God's name. The One Ring, Shadow King, and the final temptation. This is the final temptation that no man escapes, and it doesn't come dressed in evil. It doesn't show up in violence, greed, or perversion. It comes wrapped in righteousness. It speaks in your voice. It offers you the throne and tells you it's for their sake. This is a temptation of the Shadow King, and is symbolized perfectly in the One Ring from the Lord of the Rings. You've probably heard the quote, the ring doesn't tempt evil men, it tempts good men with the promise of doing good. And the ring, the ultimate source of corruption power, doesn't say, use me to dominate. It whispers, use me to protect, use me to help, use me to save them all. It shows you a vision of peace, of justice, of a better world, if only you were the one in control. And here's the most dangerous part of all, is that it makes perfect sense. The temptation is so logical, it's so moral. It plays on your love for others. It uses your genuine desire to do good. But underneath that is ego. Underneath that vision of salvation is a whisper. They need you. You are the only one who can fix this. This is where the Shadow King is born. Because instead of surrendering to God's timeline, instead of trusting divine order, instead of waiting and serving, you seize the throne. He says, if I had power, I could end the suffering. But what he really means is, I want to be the one they think. I want to be the one they follow. I want to be the one they remember. It is ego disguised as sacrifice. This is the seduction of every cult leader, every tyrant, and every failed revolutionary. They didn't start as monsters. They started as men with broken hearts and a vision for a better world. But they refused to let God lead. So they let themselves. And the result is no peace, no justice, no freedom. Just another empire built on control, fear, and uncrucified ambition. Now contrast that with Jesus Christ. The crowd tried to crown Jesus Christ king. Rome mocked him with a crown of thorns, and he refused it all, because Christ understands what most men today don't understand. You must have power, but power must not have you. Power is not evil. Jesus had more power in his breath than Rome had in his entire army, but he didn't use it to crush. He used it to carry. He used it to serve. He used it to suffer. Because true leadership isn't about who obeys you. It's about how much pain you're willing to carry without becoming bitter. How much injustice you're willing to witness without becoming vengeful. And how much authority you're willing to surrender so others can be free. And that is the test of the One Ring. Can you hold power without using it to fix your insecurities? Can you lead without being seen? Can you serve without being worshipped? Because if you can't, you're not ready. The moment you say, with this power, I could save them all, you've already felt the test. Because now, it's not about them. It's about you, your story, your womb, your need to matter. The only man who passes the test was the one who didn't need the throne, who walked always from it, who bled on the cross instead of sitting on the throne. That's why Christ is still king, because he never used power to serve his ego. He used it to kill it. So here's the question. Why do you want power for? To protect? To heal? To uplift? Be honest. Because if there's any sliver of ego in your answer, the ring will find it, and it will use you. And the scariest part is, you'll think you're doing God's work while building your own kingdom. This is the final temptation, the moment every man must face. And if you don't pass it, nothing else matters. Because it doesn't matter how many people follow you if the shadow is the one leading them. You must have power, but power must never have you. The path to the Christian power, initiation through death. This is where most men turn back. They want the wisdom, they want the power, they want the throne, but they don't want to die. And that's non-negotiable. You must die before you can lead. It's not about physical death, of course. I'm talking about the death of everything in you that was never real to begin with. Your pride, your false confidence, your spiritual image, your trauma-built identity, your need to be special, your need to be followed, your need to be seen. Every man who's ever truly walked the path of divine power has gone through the same process, not just a transformation, an initiation, and not a self-help journey, an obliteration. Here is the roadmap. I'll give it to you. If you skip even one step, you'll stay in the realm of potential, never authority. You'll preach from the outside of the fire, but never burn in it. Step 1, confession of shadows, radical honesty. The first step is ruthless radical honesty. You have to stop pretending, stop performing, stop projecting. You must look yourself in the mirror and name the shadows out loud. Your jealousy, your lust, your need for control, your hidden rage, your addiction to attention. You must confess, or if you use truth to elevate yourself instead of liberate others. When you've used women to feel divine instead of loving them. When you've claimed spiritual authority without even submitting to it. It is not enough to journal it. You must bring it into the light. Confess it to another man, to a brother, someone who has the strength to hold it and not flinch. Because what stays in the dark stays powerful. Confession is not weakness. It is the first swing of the hammer against your false self. Step 2, ritual integration. The warrior, the magician, the lover, the king. Next, you integrate. And this isn't about embracing masculine energy. This isn't about reading another book or adopting another archetype as a label. This is about living it daily in real life, under pressure. You face conflict with courage. That's the warrior. You speak truth for truth's sake, not control. That's the magician. You feel deeply and connected without seduction. That's the lover. You create order and provide safety for others. That's the king. And here's the hard part. You don't get to pick your favorite and live there. You don't get to be the warrior and never feel, or the lover who never leads, or the magician who hides behind ideas, or the king who doesn't fight. You have to rotate through each one of them under stress. You have to become flexible, whole, dangerous. Integration is painful because it demands contradiction. It makes you confront your own imbalance. But only integrated men can handle divine power without becoming tyrants. And the third step, the sacramental trial, the sacred tea. Now, and only now, are you ready for the sacrament. The sacred tea is not a party trick. It is not a shortcut to enlightenment. It is a trial by fire. When you drink it, you are not ascending. You are descending into the underworld of your psyche, into every wound, every lie, every mask. And the tea doesn't show you God. It shows you without filters. And if you haven't done the first two steps, the tea can destroy you. But if you have, if you've confessed your darkness, if you integrated your strength, then the tea becomes the mirror of truth. And it will show you how much of your soul is still yours and how much you've outsourced to your ego. This is not a vision, it is a reckoning. And step 4, the crucifixion of the ego, in public or private death. And what comes next? Your ego will not walk off the stage willingly. It must be crucified. And the crucifixion will come either in public or in private, but it will come. It may look like betrayal, like failure, like public collapse, or like isolation so deep you think God's forgotten you. But don't run. This is part of the path. Your brand must die. Your curated image must die. Your identity as a leader, as a teacher, or savior must die. You must become nothing. Just a man, bare, unimpressive, real, until you're no longer afraid to lose everything. You are not safe to lead anyone. Because as long as your leadership is about you, your identity, your comfort, your relevance, you are dangerous. Only men who have died to the need to be remembered can be trusted to guide others into eternity. And 5, resurrection of the Christian men, the servant king is born. And then, and only then, comes the resurrection. And it doesn't come in fireworks. It comes in silence, in stillness, in deeper breath. And something shifts. You no longer speak from theory. You no longer posture. You no longer try to prove anything. You speak from knowing, from embodiment, from communion with something far greater than yourself. You are no longer the center. You are the servant of the center. And here's the paradox. Now, because you no longer speak to be heard, your words will cut through shadows. This is not about being God. This is about letting God move through you. This is the Christian man, the man who does not claim the title, but he lives the burden. And this is the only kind of man who can hold power and not be owned by it. So if you want to rise, you must first die. If you want to become a king, you must first be crucified as the criminal. And if you want resurrection, you better be ready to bleed for it. Final incarnation, the crown of thorns. You've made it this far, which means at some level, something you already knows. This path isn't about status. It's not about building a platform. It's not about how many followers you gain, how many people quote you, or how many stages you speak on. It's about what happens when the spotlight fades, when the crowd disappears, when the applause stops, and you're left alone with nothing but your conscience as God. Let me tell you the truth no one else is saying. The throne is not golden. It is a cross. If you think power means easiness, you're not ready for it. If you think influence means glory, you're already corrupted. If you think leadership means control, you're already serving your ego. The men who are truly called to power, real, spiritual, Christian power, do not rise to be worshipped. They descend to carry the weight. They do not seek recognition. They accept responsibility, and they do not demand submission. They embody sacrifice. They wear the crown of thorns, not to rule, but to redeem. And that means you bleed for people who will never thank you. You show up for people who will turn on you. And you hold the line when everyone else bows to convenience. You carry burdens no one else sees, and you do it quietly. It means you become the container for other people's healing, and you do it without taking credit. It means you suffer not because you're weak, but because you're strong enough to endure what others run from. It means you become a living target, because every system built on fear, on control, will be threatened by a man who cannot be bought, seduced, or broken. If you want real power, you have to prepare to suffer, prepare to be misunderstood, prepare to be mocked, prepare to be hated by the very people you're trying to serve. You'll be too traditional for the modern world, too mystical for the intellectuals, and too masculine for the feminized, too forgiving for the zealots, and too direct for the crowds, too devoted for the casual. You won't fit into any box because you weren't made in their image. You were forged in fire, born in silence, resurrected in God's image. This is why most men never finish the path. They want resurrection, but they refuse crucifixion. They want to be king, but they refuse to suffer like Christ. They want the crown, but not the thorns. But the thorns are the proof. They are the mark that you're willing to carry something you didn't create, to suffer for sins you didn't commit, to pay the price for people who will never repay you. This is the highest form of power, because it is not about you at all. And here's the terrifying part. You can't fake it. You can't brand it. You can't market it. You can't manufacture it. You either die and resurrect, or you don't. And if you don't, you may still lead. You may still build something impressive, but it won't be divine. Because at the bottom of all this, beneath the knowledge, beneath the archetypes, beneath the sacred tea, beneath the visions and the systems and the teaching, there's a man who was beaten, mocked, murdered, not because he failed, but because he succeeded. A man who had all the power in the universe and chose to carry the cross. He didn't rule from a throne, he ruled from suffering. And only those who suffer with him will ever rise with him. So if you're still watching or reading, and you've heard every word and still want this path, I'm not going to promise you greatness. I'm going to promise you pain. And I'm going to promise you that the pain will make you whole. It will make you unshakable. And eventually it will make you free. Because in the end of this journey, it's not influence. It's not popularity. It's not even mastery. It's Christ. And Christ is not found at the top of the mountain. It is found at the bottom, alone, bleeding, begging, obedient. That's the real power. And very, very few men ever touch it. At the bottom of power is Christ. But only the dead will see him. Now you know your path. What you do next is between you and God.